We're here at Bateman's, which was the long-time home of Rudyard Kipling, who won the Nobel Prize for Literature. I think it was in the year 1906, I think. I and Fina, we've never been here before because it's quite a long way from where we live, and it is a beautiful place, and I can understand why Kipling with his wife decided to stay here. It is obviously a beautiful place, peaceful, it's quiet, and surrounded by trees, nature. It is absolutely marvellous. What would you like to say, Fina?
Halo teman-teman, apa kabar kalian semuanya? Kami pada saat sekarang ini tengah berada di sebuah tempat bernama Bateman's. Itu adalah tempatnya seorang penulis sangat terkenal sekali dari Inggris ya teman-teman, yang lahir di India. Dan namanya tuh siapa sih, Mr. Kipling ya. Dan dia itu seorang penulis yang sangat terkenal sekali. Mungkin sudah tulisannya atau karya-karyanya ada 50 buku kalau nggak salah, dan yang paling terkenal adalah Jungle Book ya. Dan dia pemenang Nobel sastra Nobel pada tahun 1907. Teman-teman, kami akan bawa kalian melihat tempat ini. Yuk kita jalan.
Kipling, of course, wrote perhaps the most well-known poem in the English language, which is called If you can keep your head when all about you are losing theirs. And that certainly helped me when I had times of stress. That particular poem, the poem If. You know, it's nice to see the place where he lived for so long. From the early 1900s, I think, up till the time of his death. And obviously he was extremely successful as a writer. It shows what success as a writer can bring. And he was obviously a fantastic writer. And I have not read all of his stuff. I remember my dad recommended Storky and Co. about a group of schoolboys. That was the first book I read by him, and later on I read other books, and particularly his short stories, which are often about army life and life in India.
So teman-teman, walaupun saya nggak begitu banyak tahu tentang penulis ya, atau apalagi ahli sastra, tapi datang ke tempat ini sangat menarik sekali karena tempatnya begitu adem ya, begitu nyaman, banyak sekali pohon-pohonan, terlebih cuaca pada saat hari ini begitu hangat dan matahari bersinar ya. Jadi sangat sejuk sekali. Kalau bicara masalah sastra teman-teman, inilah orangnya yang paling mengerti sekali tentang sastra ya, sastra Inggris terlebih ya. So mungkin tim akan bisa ceritakan kepada kalian lebih banyak lagi tentang penulis ini atau apapun tentang tempat ini.
Well, I have read a few books by Kipling, but I can't claim to have read all of them. But I've always admired him. I don't, for various reasons. He was a great believer in patriotism, I think, and patriotism in all countries, I think, is important. Fair patriotism, which is, I suppose, nowadays a controversial topic. As I said before, the first book I read by Kipling was Storky and Co., set at a boys' boarding school in North Devon, of all places. And it was about the adventures of a group of boys. Then afterwards I read other books by Kipling, such as Kim, and The Jungle Book, and many of his short stories, but also his poetry. And like I mentioned before, the poem If is probably perhaps the best known poem in the English language. and it's addressed to men, but it's a universal poem. It can be anybody in the world, man or woman. And I suppose the message of the poem is, I suppose you have to keep trying, not just to give up. And it kind of, you know, it's a poem about, you know, perhaps you could have a failure in your life, so you have a choice then whether to give up or to continue. And of course, if you're realistic, you realise you have to continue. You know, of course, Kipling, you know, one of the famous phrases in that poem, one of the most famous lines is, if you can meet with triumph and disaster and treat those two impostors just the same, triumph to be a winner and disaster when everything goes wrong. And so then you have a choice whether to give up or to keep on trying. And of course, really you have to keep on trying, because nothing will stay as a problem forever. And so I like his poem. As I say, I am by no means an expert at all in his writings, but I do enjoy many of his short stories. Another very good short story is called The Gardener, and it's set after the First World War, and of course during the First World War his son disappeared. He was fighting in action, I think in northern France or Belgium, and like so many other young men, he was lost. One of his stories is later on, after the war was over. He never got his son back, he never found out what had happened to him. But after the war was over, he wrote a story called The Gardener, which is a very, very touching story. And I'm not going to say any more, because I hope that you, whoever watching this, will maybe read The Gardener, and maybe you'll enjoy it, or maybe you'll say, it's not for me. But it's a very affecting story. Well, we've really enjoyed our visit to Bateman's, I suppose the main home of Rudyard Kipling, a writer that I particularly like. In many ways a controversial writer, and maybe not fashionable, according to current political views. But he wrote many things, and he was widely travelled. A bit like D.H. Lawrence, who is a local boy to us because he came from not far from where we live, D.H. Lawrence, and he also travelled a lot. But obviously a very different personality, D.H. Lawrence. But to see the house of Kipling, where he lived, I think, for most of his time, perhaps maybe his favourite house, he settled here and lived here for a long time, was very moving. And it kind of, you know, was the room where he studied. They've kept that exactly as it was, because his wife, when she gave it to the National Trust, specified that it should be left exactly as it was, and so it's exactly the same as it was. So the guide there, the female guide who was there explaining it, said that if he were to come back, he'd recognise that room because it's just the same as when he'd left it all those years ago. I suppose in 1935 or 36 he died. In 1936 at the age of 70. So you know, he you know, his words are inscribed on the cenotaph in London, you know, his poems are kind of inscribed in many places, and so he is obviously a distinguished writer. As I say, a controversial figure, particularly nowadays. Times have changed, as times always tend to change, but certainly to me a great hero. So Fina, what do you feel about the whole visit?
Ya teman-teman, sangat menarik sekali datang ke tempat Rudyard Kipling ini, yaitu sastrawan Inggris ya. Dan itu ceritanya untuk saya pribadi ya, yang nggak tahu soal sastra, itu sangat menyedihkan. Apa yang membuat saya sedih adalah ketika mereka kehilangan anak laki-lakinya untuk berperang, dan mereka tidak tahu di mana kuburannya, dan tidak juga ditemukan bodinya ya. Jadi sangat sedih sekali ya, karena saya juga berasal dari keluarga tentara. Ayah saya juga seorang tentara, anak saya juga seorang tentara. Jadi itu seperti ada koneksi antara saya dengan penulis ini, walaupun saya nggak ngerti sama sekali soal sastra. So teman-teman, terima kasih sekali untuk kalian yang sudah terus mengikuti dan setia bersama The Adventure of Fina and Tim. Jangan lupa ya untuk like-nya dan juga subscribe-nya untuk kalian yang baru saja menemukan channel kami. Yuk ikuti terus adventure kami selanjutnya. Take care and bye.
Bye-bye.